October 14th, 1943, 15,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Germany, a German fighter pilot pressed his pencil into the battered leather of his logbook. Just another kill, or so it seemed. 17th, a heavy bomber shot down. Another B-17 spiraled out of the sky, trailing smoke and panic, vanishing into the autumn haze. Through the streaked canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the rest of the American bombers desperately hang together, gunners blazing away with 50 caliber fire into empty air, hoping to hit something, anything, as the German fighters peeled away. Air combat here played out in brutal, simple math. German pilots picked their moments, striking from the sun, hitting hard, then disappearing before the bomber gunners could respond. Without fighter escorts, American bombers were little more than flying targets. That morning, 291B and 17s crossed into German airspace, aiming to take out the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. By nightfall, 60 never made it home. Another 17 limped back, so badly shot up, they'd never fly again. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. For the Americans, it became Black Thursday, the worst day in the 8th Air Force's history. What nobody realized, not then, was that German dominance like this wouldn't last. 4 months later, everything would look different. Right now, though, German fighter pilots had every reason to feel invincible. Guys like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, older brother to Adolf Galland, Major Walter Dahl, and others had turned bomber hunting into a deadly science. Months of combat had taught them how to attack these massive formations, chipping away at their weaknesses, always refining their tactics. The Americans tried to fight back with the combat box, a formation of 18 to 21 B-17s layered in a three-dimensional pattern, each bristling with .50 caliber guns meant to cover every approach. On paper, it sounded solid. In the chaos of battle, though, the Germans found the cracks, blind spots in the nose, gunners short on ammo, and above all, the sheer terror of being under constant attack. Hermann Heinz Knoke, leading 5JG-11, was a master of the head-on attack. That was the B-17's weak spot. He'd first bagged a heavy bomber, a B-24 called Maisie, back in February, and by October, he had 17 to his name. His method was almost surgical. Come in from dead ahead, dive through the formation at 400 mm, fire a quick burst at the cockpit and engines, then break away before the gunners could even get a bead on him. The numbers told the story. On the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid back in August, the Luftwaffe shot down 60 bombers, 16% of the entire attacking force. American losses were so bad, they had to call off deep raids for weeks. When they tried again on October 14th, it was even worse. 77 bombers lost or written off, over 600 airmen killed or captured all in one day. Major Gashb, leading TUJG-11, took things a step further with the company front attack. 8 FW-190s swept in side by side, flooding the bombers' defenses with too many targets at once. Gunners, facing a wall of fighters closing at 600 mph, had just seconds to react. Most of the time, they fired wild, hitting nothing. The real problem for the Americans was simple: physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 could escort bombers deep into Germany. The P-47 Thunderbolt, their main escort, had a combat radius of 375 miles with drop tanks, enough to reach the German border, but not Schweinfurt. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning could go farther, but it struggled in Europe's high-altitude cold. Engines quit, controls iced up. So, for the most dangerous part of the mission, the bombers flew alone. German fighters just waited outside escort range and pounced. Luftwaffe pilots even had a name for the spot where Allied escorts had to turn back: the golden moments. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who racked up 206 victories before he was killed in October 1943, described it perfectly. "We tracked the bomber streams on radar, figured out where the escorts would peel away, and the moment the little friends left, we struck. You could see the bombers tighten up, bracing for us. That was the cold arithmetic of the air war. A B-17 crew might spend 4 hours over enemy territory but only get fighter protection for 90 minutes. The rest of the time, they were on their own, and everyone knew it. German fighters had a huge advantage. They could attack bombers, land, refuel, rearm, and be back in the air for another pass while the bombers were still limping home. Some Luftwaffe pilots managed to fly 3 or 4 sorties against a single raid. That really multiplied their impact. Funny enough, the P-51 Mustang didn't start out as some grand American project. It was actually the British who kicked things off. Back in April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission went to North American Aviation hoping to buy more P-40 fighters, and North American had a different idea. "Let's just build you a brand new fighter in 120 days. And they did. The NA-73X took its first flight on October 26, 1940. Honestly, that kind of rapid development is wild. The early Mustang ran on the Allison V1710 engine. Down low, it was fantastic, but once you got above 15,000 feet, the altitude where bombers needed escorts, it just couldn't keep up. So the RAF used these early Mustangs for tactical recon and ground attack. Their long range and low altitude performance came in handy there, but the big turning point, that came from a bit of British engineering magic. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison Mustang and saw right away what this plane could be. The airframe was sleek, even cleaner than the Spitfire. All it needed was a better engine. Harker suggested swapping in the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same engine driving the latest Spitfires. By October 1942, the first Merlin-powered Mustang took to the skies. The jump in performance was huge. Top speed jumped from 390 to 440 mph. More importantly, the Mustang could now perform above 20,000 feet. Suddenly, it was exceptional where it used to struggle. The service ceiling shot up from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. American mass production teamed up with British engine brilliance, and together they built something truly new. But what really set the P-51B apart wasn't just speed or altitude, it was the range. 3 things made that possible: the Mustang's super-efficient laminar-flow wing, decent internal fuel capacity, 184 gallons compared to the P-47's 305, but in a lighter, more efficient airframe, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without losing much performance. North American's Edgar Schmood designed that laminar flow wing to keep air moving smoothly over more of the surface, which cut drag by nearly 30%. That meant better fuel efficiency. The P-47 burned 100 gallons an hour while cruising. The P-51 used only 65 at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added in early 1944, the Mustang's combat radius stretched to 650 miles. With 108-gallon tanks added in March, it could reach 850 miles. Now, pilots could fly to Berlin, fight for 20 minutes, and make it back to England. No other single-engine fighter on Earth could do that. The 354th Fighter Group, known as the Pioneer Mustang Group, got the first P-51Bs in November 1943. They were based at Boxted in Essex. Technically, they belonged to the 9th Air Force, but right away, they started helping out with 8th Air Force bombing missions. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, barely had time to get his pilots switched over from P-47s before they were in action. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would go on to lead the 353rd Fighter Group, took one of the first Mustang orientation flights. He remembered, The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something special. The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt. It was responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever. The first P-51B combat mission went up on December 1st, 1943, a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. 4 days later, they flew their first escort mission, tagging along with bombers for a short-range raid to Amiens. Just 16 Mustangs went, more of a test than a real escort, and they didn't run into any German fighters. Still, it proved the Mustang could do high-altitude escort work. December 13th brought the first long-range escort mission out to Kiel, 490 miles from base. That was unreachable for Allied fighters before. The psychological shock hit both sides fast. German pilots, used to finding unescorted bombers over northern Germany, suddenly found themselves face to face with aggressive American fighters deep inside the Reich. The last week of 1943, the 8th Air Force started pushing the Mustang's limits. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen and claimed 3 German fighters without a single loss. The Luftwaffe, still trying to figure out what they were up against, stuck to their old playbook, waiting for the escorts to turn back. But now, the escorts weren't leaving. At a distance, German pilots often confused the P-51B for the P-47 and expected them to peel off any minute. When the Mustangs just kept going east, far beyond where P-47s had to turn back, that confusion turned into real alarm. Allied intelligence started picking up nervous radio chatter. German controllers kept pressing their pilots. Double-check your type. Where exactly are you? Because they just couldn't believe Allied escorts had pushed so deep into Germany. Major Klaus Mitusch, leading 3JG-26, saw what was happening right away. After he landed from a December 30th interception, Mustangs trailing his fighters all the way down, he gathered his men and said, "The air war has fundamentally changed. Our sanctuary no longer exists." Jump to March 4th, 1944, 25,000 feet above Brandenburg. Down through broken clouds, Berlin spread out, impossible to miss. The city, Hitler's heart, the one place Goering swore would never see enemy bombers, was right there. Above it, 660 American heavy bombers flew in tight, steady formation. All around them, weaving in and out, P-51 Mustangs with American stars kept watch. This wasn't just a win. On some tactical chart, it shattered the myth of German invulnerability. Colonel Donald Blakesley, leading the 4th Fighter Group, had just pulled off something the German High Command called impossible. 4 days after getting their new P-51Bs, his group made the 1,800-mile round trip to Berlin and back, escorting bombers all the way. For the German pilots scrambling to intercept, it made no sense. They'd been told Allied fighters couldn't reach Berlin. Too far, not for single-engine planes, yet here they were, fresh, aggressive Mustangs, still full of fuel after 500 miles, while German defenders were already watching their own gauges dip into the red. The air battle was brutal. The Luftwaffe threw over 200 fighters at the bombers, but the Americans weren't worn-out gunners. They were Mustang pilots with altitude, energy, and a real edge in their machines. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 kills, but the biggest story was how many German attacks just fell apart before they could even get close to the bombers. For the Americans, the P-51B was a game-changer. Captain Donald Gentile, who'd go on to become one of the top Mustang aces, summed it up. "The Mustang gave us everything we dreamed of. Fast enough to run down any German, nimble enough to dogfight, and with the range to follow the bombers anywhere they needed to go." The cockpit was tight but smartly laid out. The pilot sat right behind that long, humming engine with a clean view forward, much better than the old P-47 where the engine blocked half the sky. The later D model's bubble canopy would help even more, but already the B's greenhouse canopy gave solid all-around vision. Lieutenant Robert Powell from the 352nd Fighter Group didn't sugarcoat it. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours sucking oxygen above 10,000 feet. Your mouth turned to sandpaper, your back ached from the parachute and dinghy pack, and your neck never stopped hurting because you never stopped checking for enemy fighters. But the Mustang could do the job, and that changed everything. The sight of Mustangs over Berlin sent the Luftwaffe High Command into panic mode. Reichsmarschall Goering flat out refused to believe it at first, even when shown German gun camera footage clearly catching P-51s over the capital. He's supposed to have said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." Maybe he never actually said it, but the shock was real. This was a disaster for German strategy. Everything about their air defense had relied on the idea that central Germany was safe, out of reach. Training fields, assembly plants, and factories were deep inside the Reich for a reason. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, hunt German fighters over Munich, and escort bombers to any target they picked. Major Günther Rahl, one of Germany's top aces, put it simply, the Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive, it transformed it. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought the battle to us on their terms whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe tried to answer. They built up Sturmgruppen, heavily armed FW-190s, hoping to punch through the fighter screens and tear into the bombers up close. But those ponderous assault fighters were sitting ducks for the Mustangs. The Germans even tried mass attacks, launching whole groups at once, but the Americans just had too many fighters with too much range and too much punch to be pushed aside. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, big week, the air war changed completely. The 8th Air Force kicked off Operation Argument, hammering German aircraft factories, and this time the P-51s were always there, flying escort all the way. In just 6 days, American crews flew 3,300 bomber missions and 3,673 fighter missions. They lost 226 bombers but claimed over 500 German fighters, the real blow for Germany. They lost pilots they couldn't replace. The American approach wasn't just about hitting targets anymore. They were hunting for a fight. General James Doolittle, who led the 8th, put out new orders in January 1944. Now, fighters were supposed to leave the bombers once the bombs dropped and go looking for enemy planes. Captain John Godfrey from the 4th Fighter Group explained it pretty simply. They'd escort the bombers, then they'd dive down to strafe airfields, catch German fighters as they were landing or taking off, just looking for action. Suddenly, the numbers started to swing hard in the Allies' favor. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,111 pilots. In February 2,121 March, another 2,115. So many of these were seasoned veterans with years of experience, guys the Germans just couldn't replace. The Americans were losing plenty too, but with their massive training programs, 11,000 new pilots came through every month. For the Germans, there was no way to keep up. The P-51 was more than a long-range escort. It was proof of American tech and industrial muscle. By late 1944, Mustang pilots got the K-14 computing gun sight, which gave them a real edge. This thing calculated lead automatically so pilots could hit targets even in tight turns. The P-51's 50 caliber Brownings might not have been as heavy as German cannons, but they had more ammo and shot faster. A Mustang could fire for almost 30 seconds straight, while German fighters usually had less than 10 seconds worth of cannon shells. In a drawn-out dogfight, Americans could afford to take their time. German pilots didn't have that luxury. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces, saw the difference up close. The Mustang wasn't just another fighter. It was a complete weapons system, everything working together for one goal. German planes were good, but nothing matched the Mustang's all-around package. But behind all these numbers, there's the human side, a level of tragedy that's hard to grasp. Most of these pilots were barely out of high school, fighting desperate battles 6 miles up where it was minus 50 degrees. Some died instantly. Others suffered burns, lost limbs, or drifted down in parachutes full of bullet holes, dying slow, awful deaths. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group remembered shooting down a Bf-109 in March 1944 and watching the German pilot bail out. The man's chute opened, but he was burning as he fell. Trying to beat out the flames with his hands, Wisner could only watch. German pilot Walter Schuck from JG-7 talked about how things changed. In 1943, he said, "It felt like a fair fight. Knights of the air dueling with bombers. By 1944, they were the ones being hunted. Mustangs followed them right down to their airfields, circling above like hawks waiting for a chance to strike. Nowhere felt safe. The stress was crushing. Luftwaffe pilots who'd been confident just months before started to lose hope. Letters home, later found in archives, showed just how bleak things got. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off, knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel, more ammunition." By summer, the Mustang's range opened up a whole new front. They started targeting Germany's oil industry. Synthetic oil plants at Leuna, Perlitz, and Brooks, places bombers couldn't reach before, now got hit regularly, always with fighter cover. The Luftwaffe took the hit hard. Aviation fuel production crashed from 175,000 tons in April to 30,000 in July, then just 10,000 by September. Training flights got cut, then shut down. New pilots showed up at the front with barely 50 hours of flight time, while their American counterparts had 300 or 400. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who led JG-7, summed up the mess. Germany had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262. It could hit 540 meter per hour, but they barely had enough fuel to get them in the air. Steinhoff watched, frustrated, as these cutting-edge jets just sat there while Mustangs owned the skies. D-Day, June 6, 1944, showed just how much things had flipped. The Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France. The Allies, they flew 14,974. The tide of air power had turned for good. Only 2 German fighters showed up over the invasion beaches. Allied pilots, especially those flying Mustangs, completely owned the skies, so the landings went ahead with barely any trouble. From German planes, Obsal Josef Pips Priller, who led JG-26, was one of the 2 who dared to fly over the beaches. His wingman was Heinz Knoke. They streaked in low and made a single strafing run along Sword Beach. Later, Priller called the mission suicide disguised as duty. Somehow, they made it out alive. The only reason? Allied fighters were so shocked to see just 2 FW-190s that they didn't react in time. The Mustangs weren't just escorting bombers. They dove right into the action, dropping bombs and shooting up anything that moved. P-51 pilots got really good at train busting, using their .50 caliber guns to blow up locomotives. A single Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or a rack of 10 5-inch rockets, plus its guns. A real nightmare for anything on the ground. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, the guy who'd later break the sound barrier, flew Mustangs with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-109s in one mission, but he wasn't blind to the dark side of all this. We went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved. We'd strafe trains, knowing there might be civilians on board. It was total war, and the Mustang let us bring that war anywhere in Germany. Germany tried to fight back with cutting-edge jets, the Messerschmitt, Me-262 and the rocket-powered Me-163. Comet. The Me-262 could hit 540 mph, almost 100 meps faster than the P-51D. In the hands of a veteran, it could rip through bomber formations and vanish before the Mustangs could catch up. But even these technological wonders couldn't turn the tide. Adolf Galland, flying an Me-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 planes. He saw the writing on the wall. We were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For every Me-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs. Allied fighters hovered over German airfields waiting to pounce on jets. During takeoff or landing, their most vulnerable moments, those early jet engines were touchy too. They needed gentle throttle work and long, smooth runways. Mustang pilots figured this out and used it. Lieutenant Urban Drew from the 361st Fighter Group nailed 2 Me-262s on October 7th, 1944, catching them as they lined up to land. Low on fuel and slow, they didn't stand a chance. By early 1945, the math just didn't work for Germany anymore. The US built 15,186 P-51s during the war. About 8,000 of them fought in Europe. In March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone fielded over 1,000 Mustangs in 14 fighter groups. The Luftwaffe, on a good day, maybe 300 to 400 working fighters across the entire Reich. Fuel was running out. Most planes never even left the ground. The ones that did were often flown by teenagers with barely any training. The kill ratios told the whole story. By 1945, Mustang pilots claimed 10 kills for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, who led the 352nd Fighter Group, finished the war with 24 victories, all in Mustangs. He said by 1945 it wasn't combat, it was execution. We'd find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land. The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots made it clear how much the Mustang changed everything. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland wrote in his memoirs, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we had controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Knoke, who survived the war with 33 victories, didn't mince words. The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe, not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months. The youngest German pilots had it worst. Many started combat with barely any training. One captured pilot said, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944 with 55 hours total flight time. On my 3rd mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself." The Mustang's impact went way beyond dogfights. It made deep raids possible with losses the Allies could stomach so they could systematically wreck German industry. By March 1945, German oil production, always their Achilles heel, was cut to just 10% of what they needed. The rail network was in pieces. Troops, supplies, raw materials, going nowhere. Cranking out fighter planes didn't mean much when there wasn't any fuel to fly them or enough trained pilots left to climb into the cockpits. General Karl Spaatz, who led the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, once said, "The P-51 was the decisive weapons system of the European air war. It made the daylight bombing campaign possible, cleared the way for the invasion of Europe, and helped break the German military. But numbers and strategy only tell part of the story. The Mustang didn't just change tactics, it changed people." German pilots who went into combat in 1943 feeling invincible didn't come out the same, if they came out at all. Many could point to a moment when they knew the war was lost, and almost every story started the same way. Their first encounter with Mustangs high over Germany. For some, the change went even deeper after seeing the sheer scale of American resources and the surprisingly fair treatment of prisoners. A lot of Luftwaffe veterans started to question everything they'd been fed about the enemy. The gap between Nazi propaganda and reality wasn't just jarring, it shattered morale. The P-51 Mustang was a game-changer, plain and simple. Its laminar-flow wing slashed drag like nothing before. Merging a British engine with an American airframe set the stage for the kind of international teamwork we still see with NATO and the Mustang's range. It blew up the old idea that fighters were just for short-range defense. Suddenly, fighters could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. That mindset shift shaped everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to today's jets flying worldwide with mid-air refueling. Look at the numbers and it's almost hard to believe. 15,286 Mustangs built, 4,950 enemy planes shot down in the air, another 4,131 destroyed on the ground, more than 9,000 locomotives wrecked, and over 213,000 combat sorties flown. The kill-to-loss ratio in the air? Better than 11 to 1, but stats only go so far. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's spirit, cleared the skies for the Allies, and shaved months, maybe even years, off the war. The shift was brutal and fast. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe owned the skies, tearing through Allied bombers. By March 1944, Mustangs were flying shotgun all the way to Berlin. By June, the Luftwaffe could barely put up a fight. And by April 1945, it was finished. This wasn't a slow bleed. It was a sudden collapse. Every lost pilot was irreplaceable. Every destroyed plane made training the next crop even harder, and every successful mission with Mustangs up front gave the Allies more confidence to hit harder and deeper. Just look at the pilot losses. In 1943, Germany lost nearly 3,000 pilots. In 1944, over 12,000. And in the war's last stretch, another 4,200 flight training hours plummeted from over 250 before combat in 1943 to just 40 or 50 by 1945. Rookie pilots were being thrown into battles they had no hope of surviving. Maybe the Mustang's most important victory was psychological. It crushed the myth of German technical superiority and proved that democracy could outbuild and outfight a dictatorship. By 1945, German pilots who used to laugh at American bombers were refusing to fly suicide runs against Mustang-escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe recruits, pumped full of Nazi ideology, found themselves face-to-face with American fighters that shattered everything they'd been taught about who was supposed to be superior. Even decades later, the impact lingered. In 1985, American and German fighter aces met for a reunion in San Antonio. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew 116 P-51 missions and scored 16 and a quarter kills, sat across from Gustav, Germany's third top ace. Glasses raised, Anderson put it simply, to the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war, We had great planes and great pilots, and we were fighting on our own turf. But you had the Mustang. That made all the difference. Walter Schuck, who switched from flying FW-190s to piloting ME-262 jets, put it bluntly. We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to ducking from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military has ever seen a turnaround like that. General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still marked by scars from his Mi-262 crash in April 45, remembered it this way. In 1943, we laughed at your bombers. We just couldn't believe America would ever build a fighter that could escort them all the way to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang proved them wrong. It taught every German pilot what happens when you underestimate your enemy. If you want to know when we realized the war was lost, Steinhoff said, it was that day in March 1944 when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. In that moment, every German pilot knew the war was already over for us. Think about that. In less than half a year, from October 1943 to March 1944, everything flipped. The Luftwaffe went from ruling the skies to running for cover. They were the hunters, and suddenly they became the hunted. Confidence turned into dread. The Mustang was the spark. But the real story was bigger. America's factories, the teamwork between allies, and the drive to solve impossible problems when it matters most. German pilots had always been taught that American democracy was soft, maybe even a weakness. What they found instead was something else entirely, a nation that could come together and build more planes, faster and better than anyone thought possible. Their laughter in 1943 made sense at the time. No single-engine fighter had ever managed to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. They didn't count on American ingenuity, or the way American and British technology would mesh, or the sheer muscle of US industry churning out thousands of Mustangs with shocking speed. So when the Mustangs showed up over Berlin on March 4th, 1944, the joke was over. In its place was a brutal realization. Everything they'd believed about their own skills, about their enemies' limits, about who would win, was wrong. The P-51 didn't just win air battles, it shattered old beliefs and made it clear that winning a modern war isn't about ideology. It's about factories, alliances, and the stubbornness to keep pushing forward. The German pilots who survived never forgot that day. In their memoirs and interviews, they always came back to the moment the Mustangs arrived. It wasn't Normandy or the fall of Berlin that broke them. It was seeing those American fighters over the heart of Germany, flying where no one thought they could. Even now, nearly 80 years later, the P-51 Mustang stands as the symbol of American air power in World War II. It's the plane that silenced the laughter and ended the Luftwaffe's reign. Those German pilots who chuckled in October 1943 learned by March 1944 that they'd been wrong, and by May 1945, most of them weren't around to regret it. In the end, this story is about the danger of laughing off your opponent, the strength of a democracy that can outproduce and out-innovate its rivals, and the way a single breakthrough can change everything. The Mustang proved that courage and skill matter, but in industrial war, victory goes to those who can build the most, train the best, and adapt the fastest. The change was total and devastating. The skies went quiet, and the Mustang's silhouette became the mark of the end for Nazi Germany's ambitions.